Good afternoon, and thank you for continuing with us on our journey to learn how the Trump administration may impact our investments. This session is about boardroom shakeup and the implications to a social environment. So with that, I'd like to introduce Angela Atherton. She is the co-founder of Parallel Finance and an expert in gender lens investing. Hello, Angela.
Paula, we've just entered. Did you hand over to me?
I did, and I'm
Okay.
going to drop off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome to our audience. We are thrilled to be with you here today. I'd like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Julie.
Yes. Hi, I'm Julie Gordy. I'm the Senior Vice President for Sustainable Investing at Impacts Asset Management. What we do is invest in the transition to a more sustainable economy, and that includes all aspects of sustainability, including social ones.
Excellent, thank you. Tammy, can we hand it over to you?
Hi, I'm Tammy Haygood. I'm the founder of the Black Pearl Wealth Management Group in RBC, formerly at UBS and the Impact Investment Group. And what we do is we align our clients' portfolios with their beliefs and their desires.
Thank you. Matthew?
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Patsky, the CEO of Trillium Asset Management, and Trillium was founded in 1982 to provide for the financial needs of our clients while leveraging their capital for positive social and environmental impact in alignment with their values.
Thank you very much. So we're here today. Our panel is going to focus on exploring social movements and investing, or the S and ESG investing. And we're really looking forward to a rich discussion amongst our panelists. I think the first topic that I wanted to broach is really around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really looking at the investing landscape post-election. It might be helpful if we just sort of start with what you all are seeing in terms of current and anticipated trends around corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Anyone want to start for me?
I'll jump in.
Thank you.
I'm sure anyone else could too. But so what most of the corporates that we invest in seem to be doing is basically tapping the mute button. We see a lot of companies saying less about their DEI efforts, and a couple have actually said they will end DEI programs. Not many. Most of them just say we're disclosing less, but we're still doing it. And they still say that they see value in diversity efforts, and there's plenty of backup for that. I've actually published a recent paper called The Business Case for Diversity and Inclusion, which is on our website. And there's lots of evidence that including different ethnic groups, different races, different genders, different preferences, et cetera, including them in decision-making really helps decision-making and adds to corporate value. And most companies know that.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I've seen in talking to corporations is that they're trying to walk in the middle of the road. They're trying not to be on either side of the agenda. I guess it's a difficult time to have an opinion that might be different than others. And so I think in general, people are trying to maybe reverse engineer it a little bit and show their growth, show their productivity, and then show their DEI. So
yeah, I would agree with the comments that were made, which is an awful lot of the effort continues. There's broad acceptance of the business case for why DEI matters, but you're walking a fine line of trying not to talk about it as much And we're seeing some language change where they'll get to the same, they'll be talking about it for the same outcome, but they'll use different language. And so this sort of broad concept of green hushing, of trying to hide what they're working on, has been very broad-based, and we're seeing that and you'll see companies make statements about backing away from DEI, and then when you talk to them directly, they'll give you the, well, not really. They're like, yeah, but you just made a public statement that you were backing away from DEI. And so given that you committed to us that you were committed to DEI, that's a problem for our shareholders, right? But they'll be like, no, we didn't really mean it. And I'm like, yeah. Anyway, so.
Well, one thing that's happening is the growth of the anti-woke investment economy, right? And so I think that people are trying to live with both sides of it. I don't think you can, but we don't have to go far. We just look in today's newspaper and find that Donald Trump Jr. is joining the board of 1789 Capital, and realize that there's not only the fight for DEI now, there's the fight almost against what they call EIG, and so it's a difficult place to be, but I think that people still see the value. Organizations still see the value.
I want to go two ways with the comments that you all have sort of made so far. Sort of, do you, based on what you're seeing, I mean, we talk about anti-woke. I was sort of hoping that had sort of died on the vine. Do we see that? How do we, anticipation, obviously, at this stage, where do we see that sort of, that piece going, the anti-woke, we're intentionally sort of challenging the DEI space at that degree, as opposed to just hoping that, putting our pressure on the corporations, but the actively investing in the opposite way? Where do you see that going?
But one of the things to bear in mind during difficult times, and I would count this as definitely being one of them, just because of the anti-ESG and anti-DEI and anti-woke stuff out there, is that going to get traction in the Trump administration? Yes, absolutely. They've already made that clear with some of the cabinet picks and some of the public statements that have been made. If I were in the federal workforce, I would worry a whole lot more. But it is wise to remember that there are 194 countries in the world. The U.S. is one of them. And policy is not the only driver of value in the investment world. I mean, yes, the U.S. is 25% of world GDP, but the policy can only go so far in terms of affecting what corporations do. When we look at the drivers of value in the investment world, we're still seeing things like greenness and inclusion and diversity as being value drivers, and that will stay the case. It's also wise to remember that with disclosure requirements, they can roll them back in the US. We always had horrible disclosure requirements in the US as far as ESG stuff went. Well, E&S, I should say. But we still have CSRD in Europe. We still have a lot of other countries in the world requiring disclosure of this information and still openly seeing value in being able to talk about that. So corporations that do business in the world and not just in Poughkeepsie are still seeing, the pressure for being more sustainable.
Helpful. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is globally, the pressure, or I should say the direction, is irrefutable. And so, and when you talk to companies, they talk about investment cycle of investing for 20, 30 years, not what the next administration is going to do in policy. And so there's not that, we're on the right side of the long-term trends. And companies, I think, acknowledge that broadly. Even the ones that are trying to backpedal in their talk about DEI acknowledge that's that there's not going to be a reversal of trend. And we have to sort of step back and remember what went on in the last Trump administration, where we had attempts to reverse on a lot of policy issues that mattered to DEI, ESG efforts. And that was that states and municipal governments stepped up. And in the end, the changes were, yes, there were changes. Yes, they were negative. And yes, that'll happen again. But there was an awful lot of opposition and a lot of if the state of California and the state of New York and a number of other more progressive states are stepping up, you're really muting the impact of the federal government changes. And I think that's what we'll see again.
So what I'm really hearing from sort of that combination of comments is that, first of all, long-termism wins the day, and that would be true in fundamental analysis, that we've got a body of research that supports the value of these components being incorporated in the investment strategy. Is that a fair sort of summary of the points that you've all made so far?
I think so. I mean, we all know that these are value adds. I think it's going to be incumbent on us to show the value add and then show the causation versus the other way around going forward. I don't want to be a naysayer, but I'm not as optimistic this term around in the Trump administration. And so I think it's going to really behoove us to show the value of DEI and then show the data, if you will, of DEI.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
just want to lean into that for a second. I like what Tammy was saying. I mean, I'm not optimistic about the Trump administration in any way from a DEI or environmental perspective. And that's partly because it's not just this administration. There's a lot more sort of rightward movement in the US economy. It was, I think, the sort of assault on corporate DEI efforts started in 2023 after the Supreme Court overturned affirmative action at college levels. I think corporations saw themselves as being the next target, and they're probably not wrong. So I don't want to make this sound like it's all, oh, it's okay, it's all unicorns and rainbows. It's not, but I think there is, as Tammy said, there is a value to this stuff. And I think it is really going to be important to show that. I know a lot of corporations believe it, and green hushing isn't going to solve any problems for them.
So while we're talking about sort of, what's actionable about this, your organizations are active as shareholder in shareholder engagement. I know in sort of communications directly with boards and leadership teams, as well as putting forward and supporting shareholder proposals. I think it might be useful to talk a little bit about where we think things are going with shareholder engagement, maybe giving some perspective of what we've seen this year and what we expect to see in the next year or so.
So in 2024, there were 335 social related proposals submitted, which is the second highest in the past decade. So interest has not waned. Over the past decade, about a third of social proposals were about DEI. So if the historical average held in 2024, that's about 110 proposals on DEI just this year. And that's like the second highest ever. In 2024, about 3/5 of all shareholder proposals were withdrawn, which is an all-time high, which means that the proponents are reaching usually means that the proponents are reaching some kind of accommodation with the corporation and they agree to do something that's mutually acceptable. Support levels have come down. There are about 21% of all proposals that got over about a third of the votes in favor of the proposals. And that's down about 12 percentage points from the all-time high in 2021. And that's, again, I think that's a lot of green hushing. On the flip side, though, the anti-ESG proposals that are filed, they are at an all-time high by a long shot. There were over 100 of them. In 2024, there were 108 to be precise. But the average support for those was less than 2%. So what the market is saying is, we don't want to paint a target on our chest and vote for these things, but we're definitely not, the anti-ESG stuff is not passing muster.
Which is particularly interesting, Matt, I'll let you comment in a minute. It's particularly interesting because I feel like the first couple of years, investors were kind of confused, and they were intentional about the language that they chose, right? So it was kind of easy to sort of, people thinking that they were supporting ESG, and that's actually the opposite of what they were doing with that proposal. Matt, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that the reason why I think maybe we're more optimistic is the dialogue with companies. I recognize what's going on, and the green hushing, I'll just give you, I'm not going to give the name, but a large asset manager out of New York. My friend is the chief marketing officer, and they were told to take, indeed, there's a switch in their proxy voting policy. They were told to take everything off their website that said DEI, sustainable, ESG, and he took it all down. But they're still doing it all, and plenty of their clients want it, but they don't want to piss anyone off, and they want to stay below the radar. And so you listen to what's going on, and you're like, okay, that's not great, because we're going to have another 4 years of them not voting their proxies properly. However, they're really there, and they're very supportive, and so are a lot of their clients. And so I look at it from that lens and think, we're going to get through this. It's not going to be good. We are going to see bad policies, but we are going to make it to the other end of this, and we are going to be, yes, taking some steps back and having to rebuild, but we'll make it through this. And unfortunately, yes, they're better organized this time. We know that, but let's just see how this goes in the near term. But it's like, given the people he's nominating, you do keep thinking, no, it could get crazier and it could get worse. But we're gonna have to wait and see, are they effective? I mean, let's be honest, right? Matt Gaetz hasn't succeeded in doing anything as a congressman. So I don't know how that would really work if you put somebody who is anyway, I don't want to, anyway. He's obviously unqualified. We can all agree on that. But, how effective would he be in trying to, in doing damage to everything? I don't know. I'm not sure that he'd show up for work, to be honest. He doesn't do much work now.
Well, first of all, he has to get confirmed, and that is very much in question.
Yeah.
Agreed. And we have to
Sorry,
hope,
Tammy.
right? We have to hope that that's not just the only nominee they stop, but that is, anyway, Tammy, go ahead.
But I think, okay, so it is what it is, as my mom used to say, right? But I think it's also an opportunity for us to step back and rebuild and refortify our data, our thesis, so that when we come out the other end, we're not trying to rely on something that or a methodology that we used 4 years ago. And so I think my optimism comes from them, being able to leave us alone, because they're not going to allow us to do very much, and using that time to really go back and look at our data, the way we capture our data, the relevance of it, how do we speak about it in the investment thesis, and come out the other end with something much more robust. So that's my optimism of it.
I appreciate the optimism, and I appreciate the realism. So I like both perspectives. Yeah. So stay the course, but be ready for all the things that we know are potential sort of pitfalls is sort of what I'm hearing. I wanted to grab one of the topics or subtopics that Matt sort of brought up, sort of thinking of this from sort of the investor perspective and the client reactions perspective, maybe sort of while we're still on Tammy, what are you seeing in terms of recent client sentiments or inquiries related to the social issues in their investment portfolio?
So I think we're probably on number 2 of the stages of grief. And trying to find a way forward. And I think for my larger clients, they realize that there are other avenues out there that are not subject to the public markets that allow them to get things done. But the reality is people are forging ahead. They're putting their money where their mouths are, and they're not turning back. And I think the main reason that people don't turn back is because they believe in the thesis. They believe that we actually are better companies, better economically positioned, better users of resources by using DEI. And if you believe in that, then whoever somebody allows you to call it that or stamp it that doesn't really mean anything. But it's obviously going to be difficult in trying to comb out the people that just say, oh no, we're not talking about DEI, from those people that are not doing DEI.
What we're hearing from most of our clients is they just want to make sure that we're still doing what we do, which is to invest in the sustainable economy. And so it's kind of like, please reassure us, that your commitment to sustainability and DEI and environmental greenness has not diminished. And we are saying enthusiastically, yes, you can count on us.
Yeah.
And I do want to come back to that, but before we talk about sort of what you all are doing in terms of asset management strategy, and I'll also come back to an element around data that data transparency that we sort of thread in our earlier conversation. So what did we learn from the last time this administration was in office in terms of what it means in terms of sort of our client concerns? What about capital flows? Again, on an earlier thread, could be an opportunity to double down. Is that what we saw in terms of behavior with the last administration, or any insights in terms of what you all are seeing in terms of capital flows into the space right now?
Yeah, I would say we're not seeing a distinct change in the immediate, like right now, but I will say it is worth looking back to 2016 and the election and the aftermath of the first Trump administration, because while we generally were in mourning and in shock the day after the 2016 election, we saw a response that ended up being the fastest growth we've ever seen in our history, as people thought about what they could do to have impact in issue areas that mattered to them, and came to the conclusion that one of the ways they could have impact was take their money out of index funds, broad market index funds, and put it to work with Tammy and Julie and firms like ours that are actually having positive impact. And so and I don't know, Tammy, or Julie, what the experience was of your organizations, but I know we had really 4 incredible growth years that we ended up having to change our minimum to 2.5 times what it was, because we simply had too many incoming inquiries.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think that that's the way we saw it going too. It was something like people feeling as if they could vote with their feet and try to find a solution. But there was also some frustration because it wasn't clear. It wasn't what they were accustomed to. And so that's the reason I sort of recall and say, how can we make ourselves better during this period of time? Because people want transparency and want clearness if they're going to do this. They want to know what the numbers are and how they relate to in this case DEI.
I would just go back to the sort of low Earth orbit view of things. Yes, we saw huge inflows in the first Trump administration. In sustainable investing was growing really fast during that period. That was really kind of brought to a halt, like everything else in the whole world, like COVID. So in 2021, we stopped seeing these massive inflows. We stopped gaining market share. By we, I mean ESG investing. And then there was a recession, the COVID-induced recession. So there were tons of articles during the last 2 years that talked about the death of ESG and how it was gone, and support for shareholder proposals has gone down, and inflows have been reduced, and so forth. That was actually true of all funds. It wasn't just ESG. So, there were a lot of people who were, recession will always put a dent in inflows into investment funds. So it isn't what we experienced basically in the last couple of years was what I think is a temporary halt, or at least a temporary pause in the expansion of the market share of sustainable investing. I expect that to change. Maybe not in the next 4 years, though.
Okay. So, I got a clear message, right? So one of the ways, and if we're thinking about actionable items for investors, one of the ways that they can show their support for this area is pull their money and direct it towards funds that they know, investments that they know are supporting these initiatives. But just maybe a question, one more question to Tammy, sort of as investors are talking to their investment managers and their advisors, how should they broach this topic? How should they express their interest in this area as they're having an investment conversation?
Well, that's a great question. And it has been the same over the 15 years or so that I've been in this industry. There are those that come directly at it and ask whether it's something that can be done. And when I first started, it was the advisors telling them, well, you don't need to worry about that, right? And as we've moved on, and almost every advisor can pull out of their bag at least one ESG solution that at least has ESG in the name, right? And so, I think that it really is important for investors to take their time and do some research on the organization, on the people that are investing. I mean, clearly I've been at UBS and now at RBC, and not every one of those, or not every one of the advisors at those organizations are committed to ESG. So you have to do a little bit more due diligence and find the individual that has been in the trenches for a while and really understands what it means and respects what it means. So I think that that's the first step that I would take as an investor, is to take the opportunity to really educate yourself on who's out there supporting you in this journey that you're going on, and who respects the journey that you're going on, and not just giving lip service to it.
And this is, Tammy, that makes a great transition. So from Julie and Matt, from a asset management perspective, it might be helpful for you to give a little bit of insight about sort of how you approach it in line with sort of Tammy's description of what we're looking for, it might be helpful for folks to know how you approach it and whether or not any of that changes in this new environment.
So we approach sustainability from the standpoint of what does it mean to be sustainable, which includes diversity. It isn't just about environment. A lot of people just see it as being green. It's not. It's very broad. So we have sort of two approaches. We have a top-down approach that rates every industry in the world, in the MSCI ACWI, to be technically correct about it, on 9 measures of sustainability-related opportunity and 8 measures of sustainability-related risk. And then we avoid the companies that are high risk, low opportunity. We also have a bottom-up process. It's called ESG 2.0. We'll probably change the name at some point. But it basically evaluates every company from just as a company compared to its peers on sustainability-related issues, everything from emissions to pollution to, green commitments, targets, to DEI numbers if we have them, to commitments that they've made there, et cetera. So it's very broad. And we haven't changed it. I mean, we change it when we get more information or when there's a reason to, when some issue arises that we didn't anticipate before, like, for example, well, AI is a huge source of opportunity in investing. It's also a huge risk because it can multiply and really sort of metastasize things like diversity and discrimination if the model was trained on the wrong data. So it can be a great boon and it can be a great risk, and we need to take account of that in our processes. But we haven't changed our commitment to the sustainable economy at all. So in terms of the sort of big picture in investing, we do expect that many of the new administration's promised policy changes will result in higher interest rates and then a much higher federal deficit, adding around 7 trillion to the federal debt over the next decade, and that's going to have a huge impact on interest rates. It remains to be seen how much of the promised crackdown on undocumented aliens will affect some service and manufacturing industries, but the ones that depend a lot on that labor force include agriculture, grounds maintenance, food service, textiles, apparel, tourism, hospitality, et cetera. We could see higher prices and more inflation in the prices that are charged in those industries as a result of if they make the crackdown effective. So we do expect changes to happen because of the policies in this administration, but our commitment to sustainability hasn't budged an inch.
I think one thing that I talk to my clients about when I'm talking about funds like Julie's and Matthew's is intentionality, because we know that the world is going to change, and we know that we're not always going to get it right, and we're going to miss some things. But if you're riding with a team that has intentionality to do it correctly, then you're okay to ride through the rough times and to ride through the unknowns. But if you look at something like AI and you're not with someone that absolutely has the intentionality to be inclusive and to be environmentally sensitive, then it's really fraught with error, right? Because the possibilities just amplify themselves. They're exponential.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, intentionality is really critical when you're looking at hiring an asset manager, and I'll just say Trillium's process is largely unchanged in its now 42-year history. What's changed is a lot more sources of data, because when Trillium started in 1982, it developed its own process for collecting environmental, social, and governance data because there were no data sources. Now the problem we have is there are a lot more data sources, but they are also ripe with errors. And so when you talk about the potential risks in the process of going passive with ESG data, it's that you could be introducing a lot of error in a passive process. So we just want to be careful. I'd also say that the way in which we're having intentionality about trying to have positive outcomes and impact is we're active owners, right? And certainly you know, the Impacts and Trillium are very active owners, pressing companies for improved outcomes, which is part of the intentionality of trying to make sure that that's, you know, there's positive social and environmental impact, right, in what we do. And so that remains, and that we remain very committed to that. We have a team of 6 full-time people that focus on that, and that's you know, a differentiator of buying a passive product from one of the big players. And of course, that has been also interesting to watch. And I don't, you know, is that how have the big players responded to this backlash? And you've seen some of them respond by walking a fine line, and firms like Vanguard run the other way, right? We didn't really mean any of it, but anyway. So
okay. So again, we're talking about making this actionable for our investors, our audience. And so what I'm hearing is we're looking for intentionality. If I'm trying to understand intentionality, some of the, and again, jump in if I'm not paraphrasing for you all well enough. If I'm looking for intentionality, looking at sort of the investment objectives and investment thesis of the organization, looking at their posture or their approach to shareholder engagement. Anything else that you'd add in terms of what we're looking for as we're kind of screening those investment vehicles and opportunities?
Well, you know, Trillium is a super engager. You know, they have those 6 people that Matt talked about. We all in the whole industry, we all depend on them. We report a lot of you look for their impact reports. If they have them, we have one. I recommend it. You know, look at what you have been trying to do and how well you have succeeded, and those measures, if they can be quantified, like how many engagements have we had? And one of the things that everybody does is they confuse engagement with companies with shareholder proposals. We engage with hundreds of companies every year. We file like 2 proposals, right? So and the engagement is all off the record. That's where you need the impact reports. You need to be able to go and see, all right, what are you talking to companies about? Like, we talked to all utilities in the S&P 500 last year about climate physical risk, and we made some discoveries that we think are really interesting. That's on our website, but it isn't going to show up in, you know, sort of bean counting things like the NPX form and so forth, which says how you voted your proxies. So I would say that the way to really understand what firms are doing in terms of intentionality and implementing the commitment to sustainability is to read their impact reporting.
Perfect. Thank you.
And as an advisor, that's what we should be doing. We should be going below the surface and adding value by really interpreting the impact statement for our clients. But I can't walk away from the fact that Matt has made this point a couple of times. You have to be an active investor, because you need to be looking at the world as it is, not the world as it was, and not the world as you would like for it to be. But you have to be in the trenches looking at the data that you currently have, looking at the environment that you currently have. And then you have to trust in my world, my managers, but in the general world, you have to trust your managers to look at that and make the best decision. Not the perfect decision, because that one doesn't exist, but the best decision given what we have in front of us. And I really think that that's a lesson for this time, that we cannot be perfectionists. We can't let perfection be the enemy of good. I think we have to look at what we have at hand and make the best choice versus trying to wait for the perfect choice.
So on those lines, I think we have a question from the audience that is related to this topic of active management. The question is, and I think we've partially answered it, but I want to give you all a chance to address it directly. The question is, what are your thoughts on ESG and DEI focused index funds available on the market? Are they well managed and topic focused, or are they straying from the original purpose and shutting down on visibility?
I'll just say, sorry, I was going to say the explosion we saw, as we talked about in the cycle of leading up to COVID, we've seen some rollover, and an awful lot of product that was labeled ESG has just been unlabeled ESG. There are two factors. One was the anti-ESG movement, but the more important factor was regulatory and a growing recognition that if you say you're doing something, you actually have to do it. And that was a big part of the backpedaling we saw on labeling. And so particularly with the EU and the EU regs, awful lot of product just simply basically pulled ESG from their labels. And so I just throw that out there as something that, because I've seen people say, oh, well, ESG is really on the ropes and it's down a lot in assets. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Those who are authentically doing it are still authentically doing it, and we're still in great shape. And so, you know, Impacts is doing fine, Trillium's doing fine, Boston Common is doing fine, you know, we could go on, but it's like there are a bunch of us who are doing just fine. It's a whole bunch of product that got taken off the shelf that I think people should just be, you know, not so well managed, not on topic, not really committed. The other thing I would just warn is what I already had mentioned, which is if they're just buying a database and laying it on top and then doing a passive product on a, you know, this is the MSCI lower, you know, carbon footprint index. You're kind of getting what you know, I always say to people, look what's inside it and then ask yourself, does it pass a basic common sense, the basic, you know, like, if somebody sells you a product and it says it's the world's leading ESG companies and ExxonMobil's in it, I would say you have a question mark. Now, you know, we could argue about whether ExxonMobil is one of the better integrated oil companies, but you can't tell me it's one of the best ESG plays in the world and have me not laugh. So, and you know,
Yeah.
I say that, but anyway, I'm sorry, Julie.
I'm sorry, Matt. I didn't mean
take over.
So I think with index funds, you have to be really careful. There was a huge explosion. Part of that huge growth of ESG was a lot of ETFs that came on the market. And that, I think, was a lot of big investors who always regarded it as kind of a niche play. And they had a couple funds out there. And then they saw this parade passing and they sort of ran around to the front of it to sort of get ahead of it. Do they mean it? It varies. You know, there are some index funds that are actually okay and that actually do what they say they do. But the way to know that is to you have to do all the hard work, which is you have to read the prospectus and look at the holdings and look and see whether they do any impacts reporting and how they vote. You know, are you really doing what you're saying, or did you just slap a label on it so that you could be the parade master? And that, I think, is where a lot of the pullback has been as well. So as Matt says, the committed are still committed and still operating. That huge growth, I think, was a lot of people just sort of, I had a friend who was standing on a street corner in New York in like 2019, and he heard someone yelling into his cell phone on the other corner saying, ESG, it's hot, get into it. You know, it's kind of, I think a lot of it was just that, you know, was people wanting to be part of this trend. Without actually changing what they do. In order to be, you know, authentic about it, you have to change what you do, or you have to actually do it. And those who've been doing it for a while still are. I'm sorry, Tammy.
No, I was going to be silly, and I was going to say, I thought that you were going to use New Orleans in the second line. You're just standing on the corner, the parade's going by. You might as well hop in.
Yes, perfect analogy.
So I've got a couple of other questions, and actually two of them are somewhat similar in nature. And as we talk about sort of the topic of DEI in particular, the first question is, can you please discuss the income inequality or class piece of our social piece of of ESG investing, and whether or not that's something that you all incorporate.
It's really tough to incorporate, not because we lack intentionality or will, we just don't have much data. We had an engagement a couple of years ago, or maybe last year and the year before, so recently, where we asked companies about living wages, about paying living wages, and that varies by country. And they will always sort of say, oh, yes, of course, we pay attention to that. But then when you sort of press for data, and how do you know that? And what are you basing that on? Then sometimes things sort of turn into little disappearing vague particles that turn into nothing. So I don't think there is any reporting requirement in any country that asks for living wage data. There are a couple of countries that do require wage reporting. One is Great Britain, one is Australia. Great Britain is on the record, Australia isn't. But you can usually get the data. But unfortunately, that's, companies that are either domiciled in or operating in those countries is a very small minority of the companies in the world. So it is really hard to dig down and get those data. Now, there are some companies that are notorious for paying less than a living wage. Tractor Supply was one of them. It got involved in a controversy. I don't think it's ever really gotten out of it, but I think a lot of the investors that were interested in sustainability probably don't own that company. So it is something that we think about a lot. We know that it is that kind of data is much more indicative of the intentions of the company and the policies of the company than some of the data that are required. How many employees do you have? What country are they in? That kind of thing. But since it's not required reporting, and for most companies, there's probably some things that they would regard as not in their favor. And so you get the marketing spin doctors saying, nope, don't report that.
I would say that the audit around pay equity is really difficult to do. And that's not to say that it can't be done, but it's, it's not in their best interest, and it's not their highest priority, and it's not easy to do, so it doesn't get done.
So I will say we do a lot of work on trying to look at living wage and supporting, for example, the right to organize. And so and did have an initiative that was successful at Starbucks to get Starbucks to recognize the right for their employees to organize. A lot of the data we're looking for is aggregated already in reports there, the EEO1 to the Department of Labor. Getting companies to disclose more data is a big effort. Had we seen a second, I shouldn't say a second, had we seen a Harris administration, I do think we would have gotten finally SEC mandating disclosure of EEO1 data, which would have gotten us a step closer to there being more information and access that we could look into, gender pay gap and have a better understanding of where people were on paying living wages. But that's not going to happen. We still have to press companies for disclosure, and the more disclosure you have, the better we are in terms of being able to get clarity of where they are. Let's say disclosure, despite the fact it's still bad, is improving. And it is true there are countries like the UK and Australia who have started to push in that direction. And it helps when investors are asking for that as part of the information they're looking for, to sort of make sure companies understand it is relevant to us. It's relevant whether or not your retail workers, whether your workers in general are getting a living wage. We want to know that information, and we're asking.
That's an excellent point. So, and that was another topic I wanted to get to in terms of data. And so what I'm hearing from you all is that we need more data. As it's available, we're going to keep pushing for more data, and we should all be in on that fight and trying to encourage companies to make data available. And that as it's available, investors, asset managers like you all will incorporate that new information into your investment process. Is that a fair statement, summary of where we are with data? All right.
Perfect.
Thank you. All right, so we are just about at time. I want to give everyone an opportunity to give their final thoughts on a small topic, the future of social movements and investing. Yeah, I know, Matt, don't look at me like that. Just a brief closing thought for our audience.
I think a lot of social movements and investing thrive in adversity because we see what we're interested in being threatened, and I would expect that to happen in the future.
Great thought, thank you.
I echo that and just say that during these times when, you know, it seems the darkest, it is the best time to really go deep and decide what's important to you, and time to put together your plan of action, because we will come to the light again. We just in darkness now.
Agreed, and I think the thing we need to remember is that we're working toward a improvements in outcomes and more equity and sustainability in the world, and sadly our work is not yet done. We have to roll up our sleeves and keep working harder. I've been at it now for 40 years in my career, and I do keep thinking, it's like, it feels like we're moving at a very slow pace.
Well,
But
I always hoped that we would be obsolete, you guys.
Right,
Not needed any longer because it was just status quo.
right. We
Certainly
were gonna
not there.
yeah, no, Tammy, we were gonna get to where that's just simply investing, because everyone will include all this. And that is, I remember having that conversation with Joan Bavaria, the founder, over 15 years ago. Well, 15, it was like 20 years ago, where she said, our objective is to work ourselves out of a job. Yes, but we are still very much needed today.
Yeah.
I think we can work ourselves out of the label. Let's not work ourselves out of a job.
Well, Julie, at this point, 40 years in, I'm trying to work my way out of a job.
I got
Nice
it.
try.
But thank you.
Nice try. So what I'm hearing is there's still a lot of work to do, despite the fact that we hoped that we would be further along at this stage. I think everybody, all of us on this panel are committed to that work, and we know plenty of others that are. And I've heard, as we were talking, a call to encourage investors to look for opportunities to bring their dollars into the space and support these efforts, which will only help get the data, get the changes in corporate environments that we hope to effectuate. And so I think with that, I think this is a great opportunity to close. Any other thoughts?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Yes,
your time
thank you.
today. Thank you to the audience for sticking with us and for the wonderful questions. We hope that you have some actionable insights to take with you leaving our session. Have a great day.